My cousin Brandon smirked, casually handing me his customized Glock. "Go ahead, sis. Try not to let the recoil scare you. I'll teach you the basics." He had just missed the bullseye entirely at a mere 7 yards, yet he was still treating me like a helpless child in front of the entire family. I didn't say a word. I just stepped up to the line, adjusted my grip, and squeezed the trigger 5 times. 5 rounds. One single, ragged hole perfectly dead center in the target. The arrogant smirk vanished from Brandon's face instantly. But the real shock came when the range owner, a hardened, decorated Delta Force veteran who rarely spoke to anyone, stepped out from behind the counter. His eyes were wide, fixated on my posture. He slowly approached, stopped right in front of me, and whispered a name that made my cousin turn completely pale. "My name is Morgan Ellis, and at 38 years old, I've learned that the loudest people in the room are usually the ones with the least to say. But try explaining that to my cousin, Brandon." We were standing at an outdoor shooting range on the outskirts of Sacramento for a mandatory family reunion, and Brandon was in his absolute element. He was wealthy, arrogant, and loved nothing more than being the center of attention while making everyone else feel small. He spent the first 20 minutes showing off his custom-modified Glock, bragging about the laser sights and the match-grade barrel as if he'd engineered the weapon himself. The uncles were nodding along, completely captivated by his tech bro bravado, while Brandon occasionally threw pitying glances my way. To them, I was just Morgan, the quiet cousin who traveled a lot, wore plain clothes, and kept her private life completely to herself. They had absolutely no idea about my past or the true nature of my background. Brandon took it as an open invitation to treat me like a helpless civilian who needed protection from her own shadow. He loved playing the alpha male, especially when he had a captive audience of relatives to laugh at his cheap shots. Before I tell you what happened next, take a second to comment below with the city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I stood there calmly, arms crossed, letting Brandon dig his own grave while the family watched. Brandon finally stepped up to the firing line, adjusting his expensive noise-canceling headphones with theatrical flair. He assumed a dramatic, wide stance he'd clearly copied from an action movie and pointed his pistol toward a fresh paper silhouette target hanging a mere 7 yards away. He took a deep breath, paused for dramatic effect, and fired 3 rapid shots. The loud cracks echoed across the dusty range, but when the dust cleared, the results were mediocre at best. 2 of his bullets grazed the outer rings of the target, and the third missed the silhouette entirely, tearing clean through the empty white space. A slight flush crept up Brandon's neck, but he quickly recovered, flashing a cocky grin to the relatives watching behind the safety glass. "The wind caught that last one," he lied smoothly, holstering the weapon with an exaggerated flick of his wrist. He turned his eyes toward me, a wicked smirk playing on his lips. "Hey, Morgan, why don't you give it a shot? Go ahead, sis. I'll teach you the basics so you don't hurt yourself." The uncles chuckled, and Brandon expanded his chest, clearly enjoying the chance to patronize me in front of everyone. "Come on, don't be scared," he pushed, holding the unloaded firearm out toward me like a prop. "I'll even hold your hand if the recoil is too much for a lady." I hesitated for a moment, purposely letting a look of mild nervousness cross my face to feed his overinflated ego. The anticipation in the air was thick as I reluctantly stepped forward. I reached out and took the pistol from Brandon's hands. The moment my fingers wrapped around the textured polymer grip, something old and deeply hardwired clicked inside my brain. The artificial nervousness I had put on for the family instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, absolute focus. I didn't use Brandon's dramatic movie-style posture. Instead, I shifted my weight effortlessly into a rock-solid, highly disciplined combat stance. I brought the weapon up to my eyeline in one fluid, terrifyingly efficient motion. Brandon started to speak, probably about to offer another condescending piece of advice, but the words died in his throat. The sheer shift in my body language was enough to freeze him in place. My vision focused entirely on the front sight post, blurring the paper silhouette in the background. I took a measured breath, and without a single trace of hesitation, I squeezed the trigger. Crack, 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 crack. 5 rounds tore through the air in less than 3 seconds. The muzzle flipped predictably with each shot, but my wrists and forearms locked out perfectly, absorbing the energy and snapping the sights right back on target before the empty brass casings could even hit the gravel floor. When the echoes finally faded, the range went entirely quiet. Brandon leaned forward, squinting through the dusty air at the target 7 yards away, looking for where my bullets had scattered. He expected to see holes in the dirt or the ceiling. Instead, his eyes went wide. There weren't 5 scattered holes on the paper. There was only one single, slightly ragged hole torn directly through the absolute dead center of the red bullseye. I had put all 5 rounds through the exact same spot. The absolute silence in our lane was deafening. Brandon stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as his brain desperately tried to process the mathematical impossibility of what he was looking at. The uncles behind the safety glass had stopped talking entirely, their eyes darting from the pristine, single-hole bullseye back to me. I calmly engaged the manual safety, dropped the empty magazine into my open palm, and set the cleared weapon down on the rubber shooting bench. I didn't say a single word or flash a triumphant smile. I just calmly wiped the light film of carbon residue from my hands with a small towel. Before Brandon could even muster up a pathetic excuse or ask how a quiet civilian woman had managed such a feat, heavy, deliberate combat boots crunched against the loose gravel behind us. We all turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s walking down the firing line toward our bay. It was Marcus, the notoriously intimidating owner of the outdoor facility. Marcus was a decorated military veteran, heavily rumored around the county to be retired from the Tier 1 elite units of Delta Force. He possessed a sharp, unyielding gaze that usually kept casual shooters at a distance, and he rarely spoke to anyone unless they were violating safety protocols. But he wasn't looking at Brandon or the uncles. His intense, steel-gray eyes were locked completely onto me, studying my relaxed posture, the precise way I handled the cleared firearm, and the tight, professional grouping on the target. He didn't look angry. He looked stunned, as if he had just witnessed a ghost from his past appear at a public range. Marcus stopped right at the edge of our shooting bay, his commanding presence casting a long shadow over the concrete floor. Brandon, assuming the range owner was about to lecture us, nervously cleared his throat. "Sir, if this is about her rapid firing, I was just trying to teach my cousin." Marcus didn't even look at him. He raised a single hand, instantly cutting Brandon off mid-sentence. The veteran stepped closer to me, his stern expression softening into a look of profound, professional recognition. He looked at the single ragged hole in the target, then back at my face, and slowly brought his right hand up to his brow, delivering a crisp, respectful military salute. "Ma'am, are you Major Ellis?" Marcus asked, his voice low but carrying a heavy weight that made the uncles lean in closer. I smiled faintly, returning the salute with effortless precision. "It's just Morgan now, Marcus. I retired 3 years ago." Marcus shook his head in absolute awe. "I thought I recognized that double-tap rhythm and index. I served under your command during the Joint Agency Extraction Protocol in Kabul back in 2018, Major. The men in my unit still talk about the tactical precision you displayed when our convoy got boxed in." He turned his eyes to Brandon, whose jaw had dropped so low it looked unhinged. "Your cousin here isn't just a regular shooter, son. Major Morgan Ellis was a primary tactical firearms instructor for Tier 1 Special Operations units, including Delta Force and the Navy SEALs. She wrote the literal training manual on the recoil management system you were just butchering." Brandon stood completely frozen, his face draining of all color until he looked like a ghost under the harsh range lights. The customized Glock in his hand suddenly looked like a cheap toy compared to the legendary status Marcus had just revealed. The uncles behind the safety glass were staring at me with their mouths wide open, the smug chuckles from just minutes ago completely replaced by profound awe. Brandon nervously cleared his throat, desperately trying to salvage what was left of his shattered ego. Well, I mean, she didn't mention she was in the military, he stuttered, his voice tracking an octave higher than usual. I was just trying to make sure she knew safety protocols, you know? Anyone can get lucky with a tight group. Marcus let out a short, cold laugh that cut right through Brandon's pathetic excuse. Lucky? Son, you missed the entire silhouette at 7 yards with a match-grade barrel. Major Ellis just put 5 rounds through a single hole using your own weapon without even adjusting the sights. That's not luck, that's decades of elite mastery. Marcus looked at Brandon's dramatic, movie-style stance and shook his head with pure disdain. If I were you, I'd put that weapon down, stop talking, and start begging your cousin to give you a real lesson. You're embarrassing yourself in front of a literal legend. The uncles who had been laughing at Brandon's sexist jokes earlier now stepped forward, pushing Brandon aside to shake my hand, asking endless questions about my service. Brandon quietly slunk to the back of the bay, completely humiliated in front of the entire family. The rest of the family reunion passed in a blur of handshakes and newfound respect, but for Brandon, the day was effectively over. He spent the remainder of the afternoon quietly packing away his expensive gear, completely unable to meet my eye or speak a single word to the uncles. The loud, overbearing tech bro who had walked into the range intending to humiliate me had been utterly silenced by his own arrogance. As we drove home, I realized that true strength doesn't need to bark, show off customized gear, or put others down to feel powerful. It simply waits for the right moment to speak for itself. Brandon never tried to lecture me, teach me, or patronize another woman in our family again. Have you ever had a stuck-up relative try to lecture you on something you were secretly an expert at? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.